how much difference do you think the changes of U.S. president usually mean for the relations between Israel and the United States?
Well, I think the bottom line is that absolutely nobody at this point understands what President Trump's policies are going to be in relation to Israel and the Palestinians. This could be a reason why there is so much activity at the moment on the parliamentary level. And by the way, that's all that this is. It's a terrible bill, and it's certainly not helpful for those who are trying to promote peace between Israelis and Palestinians. But we need to be clear. You know, this bill will not happen. Absolutely nothing here is going to be enacted into law in actuality. Prime Minister Netanyahu does not support this law, but I think more interestingly and more importantly, Attorney General Mandelblit doesn't either, and he has stated publicly that he will not support when this goes to the Supreme Court. He will not plead the case of the government because of the law sovereignty issue. So ultimately, it won't happen. It's a parliamentary maneuver. It's not for real.
That's an interesting test stone already, isn't it, Mr. Rubin, as to what is the U.S. reaction, possibly, if there were any laws like this could be passed inside Israel. Mr. Rubin, what do you think about that? And also the previous question, does much difference made one president to the other in the U.S.-Israel relations?
Good morning. We're at a critical moment right now in Israeli-American diplomacy where a lot of what we'd seen over the past 8 years has been pushed to the side in terms of the rhetoric from the White House calling for a two-state solution. Prime Minister Netanyahu will be here next week. He'll meet with President Trump. We're likely to see continuing support for Israeli settlement activity at some level. There was a bit of a pullback from that last week, saying settlements are not helpful, but really no condemnation, nor a condemnation of this law, which puts the United States in a very difficult position with our Arab friends and allies across the region, in addition to harming Israel's international reputation and the sense that Israel does and it creates the sense that Israel does not really, at this moment, look for a diplomatic solution with the Palestinians, that they're moving more towards settlements and waiting on a diplomatic track, which I think they believe President Trump supports as well.
Okay, at this point, Mr. Nassar, you're based in Paris. Observing from your perspective, there are two things. One is the settlement regarding this law, possibly or not, inside Israel, about what to do with the Palestinian land. Secondly, it's about whether the embassy should move to Jerusalem. These are the two thorny issues already existing right in front of us. What do you think the answers of these two issues might mean, helping us to understand what is the nature of this administration in Israel and how the U.S., the current administration, is likely to work or not with their Israeli partners?
Well, I think something that we should touch upon is to understand the current administration's relationship with Netanyahu. We have to see their common and shared vision on key issues such as national security, immigration, and militarized borders. And what that means is like a growing and unified right-wing move that both seem to share. For example, when Donald Trump pushed his agenda to have a wall on the US-Mexico border, he cited Israel as the exemplary kind of case that used this to ban immigration. Recently, Netanyahu tweeted that in support, saying that this is something that he had used, that it worked on curbing illegal immigration, to use his words, and was very successful. Now, something that I just need to emphasize when you're speaking about U.S. foreign policy is that this current administration is one of the most contested ones in the United States. And what that means is that there's a growing progressive movement that is also channeling Palestinian rights and calling for reform, when it is also calling on issues of immigration justice and other issues of national importance.
I understand what you're talking about here, because when you say contested, it could also be interpreted another way, as some have been using the word impulsive. Whether or not this administration will come up with a sound policy, at least from the U.S. perspective, toward Israel, and Israel will react in a sound way as well, it's a big question mark. Before we examine further about that, gentlemen, one of the things we could do is to look at history and what is happening right now. Talking about history, we can't go too long. maybe only two administrations. Let's do a little bit comparison. US-Israel ties have a short review both Obama and Trump's Israel policies, if the latter could have anything at all. Obama didn't have a good relationship with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, to say the least. His administration strongly criticized Israel's settlement expansion in the West Bank and also effectively allowed the United Nations Security Council eventually to adopt a resolution against the illegal Israeli settlement passed. But for Mr. Trump, things are totally different, some argue. He once promised to be more supportive of the Jewish state. He has also nominated David Friedman, a supporter of settlements, as the ambassador to Israel. Of course, to confirm or not, that's another question. He also considered moving the U.S. embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, as we mentioned earlier. So all of these seem to be interesting comparison. Mr. Rubin, you served for the Democrat administration. But you also work very closely with Israel throughout the years. What is your judgment so far?
Well, right now it's a very confused policy environment, and you just described the confusion. My assessment is that the administration does not yet know really how it wants to engage on Israeli policy related to peacemaking.
Let me ask you specifically.
As a result of that, we get mixed messages.
Mixed messages. Let me ask you specifically, one by one. The other two gentlemen also react, please. First of all, this administration coming into power with controversy regarding the so-called Muslim ban. So you see the U.S. society reacted and also international community reacted. There seemed to be a message of anti-Semitic and also anti-racist movement going on around the world. So what would this mean for Mr. Trump, who likes to look at the polls to decide his policy, when it comes to its relations with Israel, Mr. Rubin, briefly?
Well, interestingly, he met with King Abdullah at the National Prayer Breakfast about a week ago, and soon after he came out with his statement about the problems with settlements. I think he's very susceptible to public opinion, and public opinion does not support American military action in the Middle East. It is not supportive of this Muslim ban, and if it sees that the United States is supporting an Israeli policy that undermines American national security, and that's what a pro-settlement policy alone would do, there will be calls for a change in direction. The politics are getting very divisive here in the U.S. on these issues.
Absolutely, very divisive. Also, Mr. Sheff, what is your reflection about this possibility?
Well, while I agree with Mr. Rubin, I think he would also agree that security coordination between Israel and the United States during the term of President Obama actually has never been stronger. The settlements clearly are an issue. We need to remember they're not the only issue. Ultimately, the Clinton parameters, I think it's fair to say, is still the only game in town. The majority of Israelis polled time after time absolutely accept the principle that a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side together, would mean withdrawal, taking away the small minority of Israeli settlers who live outside the settlement blocks, leaving the settlement blocks intact, a land swap, if you like, for lands which the Palestinians would get south of the West Bank. This is really the plan which I think everyone understands is the plan which needs to be put into practice. So it's, not that complicated. It's a matter of will. It's a matter of will for the Palestinians as well. Less incitement and more actual reaching out for peace, I think, for Israelis will be very helpful on the part of the Palestinians.
We hope that will be the case.
If I may,
yes. Okay. Very briefly, Mr. Rubin.
If I may, the Republican Party platform this past year did not include a call for a two-state solution, the first time ever. So it demonstrates a lack of commitment to that vision that was just described for the first time in the Republican Party policy. So that is a big concern.
Okay. And other factors are also moving. Mr. Nassar, I do have a perfect question for you as well. And probably you can help us also from a very objective view. So what about other countries in the region? We all understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not just about the two-state solutions. It's also about many other regional powers, their give and take, and their future, their relations with the two places. So now, Mr. Trump, having closer relations, at least verbally, with Russia, and possibly work together even on Syria. So people would ask, what would be the kind of relationship between the Sunni and Shia, in a way, in the region? How would that, in a way, reflect upon on the future realities of the relations between Israel and the Palestinians, and then impact on the U.S. policy? Mr. Nassar.
Is this question addressed to
Yes,
me?
yes, please, Mr. Nassar.
Well, I think essentially with regards to the second aspect of your question, I think what we are seeing is that there is a continued Israeli expansion of illegal settlements, a disregard for international law, and no serious commitment to the peace process or the rights of Palestinians to self-determination. There are going to be, essentially what that means is that the post-Oslo status quo will be defunct. Whether this turns into actual legislation or not, it's a matter of time. And I think the past administration put it very well and said that should this continue, what we are to expect is perpetual occupation.
Okay.
So that's what I think on that key
What
issue.
you want to emphasize. But Mr. Rubin, what about that? The U.S. foreign policy toward other big powers of the world, their impact on the Middle East, and therefore eventually having a reflection on the U.S. policy toward Israel. It's also a very interesting question, isn't it?
It really is, and we've seen over the past few days the international community condemning this law passed by the Israeli Knesset. And significantly, our partners do not view this in the same way as President Trump and his administration does in the United States. So this is going to become a consistent tension point. And in the broader picture, the fight against the Islamic State, the fight against extremism, that's going to require partnerships with these countries. It's going to require partnerships with Sunni Arabs and with Shia as well to ensure that we're identifying the extremists and rooting them out. This only complicates that in terms of what we're trying to achieve in the Middle East. And we're going to see continually this brought up in bilateral meetings between the British and the French and the Arab world with President Trump. The Israeli-Palestinian issue will be on their agenda.
Mr. Sheff, you know the American system very well.
I would say, I would...
Go ahead. You go ahead and answer this question first, sir.
I would say it's really interesting, actually. I would say that, as Mr. Rubin well knows, there's always this separation, isn't there, between public statements and the reality on the ground. And so, of course, there might be public statements against a law which, as I said, isn't actually going to, become a reality. But the truth is that over the last few years, security cooperation between Israel, the United States, Jordan, Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, has strengthened incredibly. And, this is no secret. This is, well known by all. So there are two things happening at once. Public statements on one hand, and the reality of greater cooperation on the other. Okay,
Mr. Sheff, you know better than I do. Also, U.S.-Israeli relations has a lot to do with the internal U.S. political situation. So, Mr. Netanyahu, during the Obama administration, did not support Mr. Obama for the 2012 election. We certainly see a lot of different opinions prior to that, and also much more post to that. Meanwhile, in the U.S. system, now we see a lot of fights on the Capitol Hill. But is Israel still the crucial issue between the two parties, or every member of the two parties would like to embrace? Or it has already become an issue that can be ignored and even opposed? That's an interesting question, one part. The other part, Mr. Sheff, I still need to have your expertise. That is, how much do you think the going left, as some argue, as a result of this election of the Democrat Party, likely to impact one party's attitude, at least, toward Israel, and also the overall Middle East policy?
So it's a really good question. On one hand, I think we do exaggerate, the crucial issue of Israel within U.S. politics. There are many more important issues You know, a list of at least 20 one could think of off the top of one's head before one got to Israel. You know, Israel has always been a bipartisan, you know, issue. That is to say, Republicans and Democrats, you know, have both certainly in Congress, you know, been in support of Israel. There has been, you know, some kind of a shift recently, but I don't think it's, you know, of any great magnitude. It's always been interesting, isn't it, that the majority of American Jews are actually Democrats and support Democratic candidates. You know, but the Republican Party is at the moment, one could argue, you know, a slightly stronger friend. I don't know. You know, the Democrat Party still absolutely understands the need to support Israel, both on a security level and on a moral level.
Well, of course, Mr. Sheff was talking from the Israeli perspective. Mr. Rubin, I do need to have your answer about that briefly as well.
Sure. Well, it depends on how one defines pro-Israel. And as was mentioned, about 3/4 of American Jews did support the Democratic candidate for president. All but one member of Congress that is Jewish is a Democrat. And Democrats are willing to call for a two-state solution aggressively and actively and condemn settlement expansion and have been doing so in greater voices. At the same time, framing that within a friendship frame of partnership with Israel, as discussed, security cooperation, supporting democracy, supporting Palestine as an eventual state. And the Republicans have not been as vociferous in that, and we are seeing a split here politically as a result. And it certainly within the Jewish community is a very vibrant debate. One last note is that the evangelical support for President Trump is strongly to the hawkish side of the Republican Party in favor of settlements, and that has impacted Republican Party positioning on Israel. Not just the Jewish community is thinking about Israel policy. Evangelicals are as well.
So many nuances. And final words from you, Mr. Nassar. I know very limited time, 15 seconds if you can, sir. Final word, thank you.
Let me add just 2 quick points to that where I disagree. I think you're having a strong progressive movement, and there are 2 examples we should look at. In the Women's March on Washington, Angela Davis, an iconic and leader and figure in developing this movement, made a point to call for the freedom and justice for Palestine. And I think it's very telling that
but
there's a growing movement
it from the platform.
Okay. Let Mr. Nassar finish.
No, I'm not talking about the
Mr. Nassar, please finish.
March on
Mr. Nassar,
Washington.
please finish. Yes.
No,
I'm talking about the March on Washington. The point is we're seeing
that's what I'm referring to.
When we're seeing this new movement that is standing against Donald Trump and his presidency and his vision for the United States, Palestine is becoming part of that conversation, as are Palestinian rights.